Redditors who've seen an employee fired on the spot, what did they do that caused them to deserve it? Story 1. In 2010, I worked as a census enumerator. For anyone who doesn't know how that works, you basically take a test and a few months later you get your scores. If you score high enough, they'll offer you a position. The job itself is pretty easy, but does have some technical aspects in terms of data collection. All in all, it's not a bad gig. It ended up paying like $20 an hour, which for a kid fresh out of college was not bad at all. Anyway, they called us in for training, which was like 2 days long and probably 6 hours a day or something like that. They teach you about the census works, demographic information, logistical stuff, etc. It's pretty straightforward. Well, one of the guys there was this weird dude. Long beard, overweight, nerdy, but strangely confrontational, basically like a weirdo neckbeard. After every example, he would ask stranger and stranger questions, hypotheticals that would never happen and basically could never be answered. Everyone started getting really annoyed because this guy was just getting really weird, and also wasting a lot of time for no reason. Anyway, it got progressively worse until the moderator started clashing with him in front of everyone. Finally, the neckbeard guy admits that he's an anarchist and trying to take the system down from the inside out, which apparently consisted of wasting a few hours of some poor retired schlub's time. Needless to say, he was fired on the spot, in front of everyone. Story 2. I saw a busser get fired for leaving knives in a sink full of soapy and murky water. Now, if you've never worked back of house in a busy kitchen before, you might think, gee, it really seems like an overreaction. If you have, on the other hand, you likely understand why that's actually pretty reasonable. Story 3. I worked as a temp in IT at a nurse's college, and the ground floor was a student loan department. One of them found an iPhone in one of the student bathrooms upstairs during lunch and put it in her desk. A few hours later, the student came to us, for some reason lost and found was in the IT office, and reported it missing and that she had accidentally left it in the women's room after calling her boyfriend. My boss found the phone by simply calling the number. It had a unique ringtone, of course. Department head walked into her office, opened the drawer and confirmed it was the missing phone, and fired her in the middle of a conference with a student. I overheard him say, "If you can't do the right thing in a simple situation like this, how can I trust you to do your job ethically?" Story 4. Department manager asked to go home early because of snow flurries. We said she and anyone else who was worried about getting home safely could leave, but if the roads are open the next day, we expect them to come in. The next day came and her entire department called in. They all have variations of, "I can't get my car out of the driveway." Day 3 comes, one of her underlings admits that on the day of the flurries, the department manager told all her people to meet in the local parking lot and told them that they all better call in the next day or she would make their lives a living hell. This was apparently to teach the owner a lesson. Once we got another employee to confirm the story, she was fired on the spot. Frankly, I'm always a fan of teaching higher-ups a lesson, but you've got to be smart about it. You can't trust that everyone in a group of people is going to have the same mindset, especially if those people might think they'll have a shot at your job if you get fired. Story 5. I was working as a baggage handler. Ramp agent is the real job title, FYI, and they'd hired a guy whom everyone hated. He was lazy, stupid, and annoying. One of the big rules when working around airplanes is you don't go anywhere near the engines while they're still running. They put the fear of God into you about this during training. Well, before you go near an airplane. Once a plane pulls into the gate, you wait until you have confirmation that the engine has been turned off before you approach it. If you're not sure, don't approach the plane. Well, one day a plane pulls up to the gate, and he walks up to the engine while it's still running. People are yelling and his vest is flapping like crazy, but he's so aloof he doesn't notice. Someone runs up to him and yanks him back to a safe distance. They had already been building up a case to fire him, but that made it a lot easier. The supervisor walked him into the manager's office, and he was fired right away. We all rejoiced. Story 6. Well, he wasn't exactly fired on the spot. I did see a guy screw himself out of severance. In Canada, they have to give you an advanced warning or pay out a certain amount if they fire you on the spot. Well, this one employee was going to get fired for being generally incompetent. The final straw was when he offered his own backyard service to a lady for a car problem she didn't actually have. Her problem was foam in the oil filler cap. He claimed it was a head gasket, but it was just some moisture from a cold day. Anyways, the boss goes to fire him and he panics. He goes on the speech about how he could run the shop better than both the owner and manager and demands that the manager is fired and he replaces him or else he quits. So the boss just says he accepts his resignation and wishes him the best in the future. Story 7. My colleague threatened to destroy the server room if he wasn't made my peer rather than my subordinate. He was a year older and we were hyper-competitive over a promotion that I ended up winning. I thought it was all in a healthy way, but I might have thought differently if I hadn't got it, I guess. I don't think for a second he meant what he said, but my boss was left with no choice but to assume he did. Both felt very bad about it afterward. A guy started his first shift at a pizza place I used to work at. He said when he worked at Hardee's, if someone came in he didn't like, he would wee on the grill and then cook their burger. Owner overheard this and fired him. What a reasonable and mentally stable coworker. Story 8. Worked at a restaurant that was having a meeting with everyone present, including the higher-ups. Pretty normal meeting, and everyone is discussing changes they'd like to see or changes they'd appreciate, etc. At one point, head manager asks if anyone else has something to share. This one dishwasher raises his hand and says, I know I've not always been the best, but I'm gonna work on that. From now on, I won't get baked in the stairwell by the dumpster. I'll walk down the street on my break. You won't even smell it on me anymore, promise." Dead silence in the room. The manager speaks up. "Did everyone else just hear that?" We all nod. "Great. So now I have to look like a jerk and fire you. What were you thinking?" Manager says. The dishwasher is shocked. "But I said I was fixing it. You guys won't even know anymore." He was walked out and removed in front of the whole staff. At least we can admire his honesty. Just a side message, if you like our stories and would want to see more, press the subscribe button and click on the notification bell so you'll get updated for more of our uploads. Thank you, and now back to the stories. Story 9. The fired party did nothing to warrant termination, and the manager who fired her was dismissed. A young accountant, around 24, made an appointment to see her manager. Both parties agreed that she informed him that she would be having surgery the following day to remove and biopsy a tumor. She wanted to discuss the status of her projects and develop a coverage plan for while she was on medical leave. He wanted her to delay her surgery until after a certain project was complete. While she was walking to Human Resources to apply for a medical leave of absence, her manager followed her and screamed at her about being insubordinate and insisted that he would fire her if she didn't return to her desk immediately. She calmly stated that this was a medical emergency and the timing of the surgery was non-negotiable, so he fired her in front of the director of Human Resources. He was terminated the next day, which I did not witness. She returned to work once she had recovered enough to do so, about a month later if memory serves. That HR director was the only thing standing between that employer and a massive wrongful termination settlement. Story 10. Worked in an energy efficiency rebate program assessing applications. One employee was making exceptions for contractor buddies. She wasn't even allowed to empty her desk. Her manager delivered her personal items to her outside. Story 11. God, she was a piece of work. Never worked. Called out 2 weekends in a row lying about broken legs or her car not starting. Lied to get other employees in trouble for her screw-ups. Bragged about how much work she got out of to the owner's son who also worked there. We couldn't convince the GM to fire this lazy little He had a soft spot for her. Finally, someone showed the GM a Facebook post she made public, absolutely trash-talking him, the only person at work who didn't hate her guts, and lying about how much she works and how the entire store is incompetent except her. He wrote her up for poor conduct and excused call-outs, etc. She refused to sign the write-up because he was right that she was worthless and he fired her right there. It was like a 160-pound weight got lifted off of everyone there. 90% of the staff was looking for new jobs. She was a walking toxic cloud. Story 12. I was 21 and a hostess at a fine dining restaurant. For some reason, even though I was well versed via the seating chart and was careful to make sure it was fair, 2, 4, and 6 tops equally spread out, this girl had it out for me. She came up to the hostess stand and bawled me out, let me know that if I ever sat another kid or old person in her section, she'd let me have it. What? I went to the general manager and told him I'd quit. It was either her or I. He fired her on the spot. She threw a full-on tantrum and called me every name in the book. Good bye. Story 13. I worked in a doctor's office and we had a maternity leave that was being covered by PRN help. Well, one person who came to help cover the office had been passed from office to office because she couldn't do anything right. She couldn't take a patient back in under 20 minutes and she couldn't file paperwork. It was just bad. So she arrives at our office and we put her answering phone calls. She answered the phone. "This is Dr. X's office. Can I take your order?" My manager lost it and told her to leave and never come back. Worst part, she called the boss and asked for a new assignment. He had to repeat 3 times that she was fired and there was no new assignment. She genuinely did not understand what "you're fired" meant. Story 14. Got distracted during a surgery. Patient suddenly passed because he was joking and goofing around with the surgical assistants. The cameras caught it. He's now in jail. Story 15. One of my coworkers accused another of stealing medication out of a personal locker with a combination lock. We asked the victim how the accused knew the code and that there was medication. The victim responded that he had previously sold medication to the accused and that he must have seen the code. The accused employee may or may not have been guilty. He denied taking the meds and a search of his locker yielded nothing. The victim was promptly fired because selling prescription medications on company property is grounds for instant termination. Story 16. I tossed some stuff into a bin next to the guy in the warehouse during a summer job in college. He thought I was throwing it at him and started yelling and coming at me. I ignored him and went on to the next shelf that I needed to put stuff away on, and he kept after me. At this point, he was yelling so loudly that the shop boss heard him from the other side of the massive warehouse and made his way over from behind the guy. The boss looked at me and asked what was going on, and I told him. The other guy was still yelling. He was gone in less than 10 minutes. It was his first day. If the guy was that hot-headed, you're lucky he wasn't waiting for you in the parking lot when your shift was done. Story 17. Server at an Italian restaurant. A coworker tried hitting on a guest who was celebrating her 14th birthday with her entire family. Her friends were telling him not to try anything, but he still asked for her number and her mom overheard everything. The mother quickly informed her general manager, who confronted the server and fired him on the spot. About a year or so later, he tried asking for his job back. You couldn't serve if you were under 18, but if I remember correctly, he was around 20 or 21 years old when he pulled this stunt. There's no, "I thought you was older" excuses when all you have to do is count the candles on the cake. Story 18. In high school, I worked at Perkins, first as a dishwasher, then as a cook. One night, I was the only cook, and the dishwasher was getting close to leaving. I told him to finish the dishes currently waiting, then he could go. After he left, I found several hours' worth of silverware in the garbage, covered with a light layer of food to hide it. I called his house and told him not to come back. I had no power, but he really needed to be fired and felt good to do it. Officially, he was a no-show since I couldn't actually fire him. The next night, I told the assistant manager what had happened and what I did. So he called in a replacement, and everyone was happy. Story 19. I worked at a hospital for children and came in one morning to find the security guard, who was one of my work buddies, waiting for me at my desk. I worked really early in the morning, at either 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. He was kind of shaken up, and it took some coaxing to get him to tell me what was wrong. Apparently, this old guy who worked overnight at the switchboard operator desk, who I always thought was really nice since we'd sometimes cross over by an hour or two and would just chat about the world, had been caught by the security guard looking up CP on the work computer. Keep in mind, we worked at a hospital for children. Not that CP is okay in any other scenario, but it was particularly frightening to know that this guy had access to patient areas and was surrounded by kids all day, some of whom did not have the cognitive capacity of normally functioning kids, and tend to be targeted more frequently by those with nefarious motives. Also, if CP wasn't bad enough, apparently it had a strong element of BDSM as well. According to my security friend, he actually wasn't certain if the children in the pictures he had happened to see were still alive. I want to throw up just typing that out. I had to cover the switchboard that morning when HR called him in. I never saw the old guy again, and my security guard buddy had to speak with a bunch of people to verify, along with the IT department, what he had seen. Story 20. I had an employee who was brought into the office for doodling on product packaging. The other manager in the room said, "Do you know why we have you in here?" He replied, "Because I was stealing." Yep, fired on the spot. Wow, that problem solved itself. Story 21. I hire contractors for large teams and I've had a few. Most common, being drunk or baked at work. It happens way too much. Creepiest. Girl complained a guy was stalking her at work. I talked to him and said he needs to stay away from her. Walked in on him licking her computer mouse and touching himself. Most impressive. It was a team of attorneys working on a document review and privilege log. She was absolutely the best one I had. Smart, competent, super friendly, and knew the law backwards and forwards. Her agency showed up with a security guard from the firm. The woman had lied on her background check and was using someone else's name. She was not an attorney and had never gone to law school. She already had a history with the law of impersonating other professionals, including an accountant, a locksmith, and even as a doctor. I don't know the full story, but I'd like to believe she was as good at those positions as she was at being a lawyer. Saddest, in retrospect, the guy came highly recommended but was constantly messing everything up. Just terrible mistakes. Completely missing meetings, leaving tasks undone, just all around completely incompetent. I worked with him to try to get him to do better, and he was genuinely trying. When I pointed out the mistake, it was obvious to him and he couldn't believe he made it. He couldn't explain his thought process. He was so frustrated to the point of tears because he was trying so hard. They eventually called him in after a very public screw-up and said we had to let him go. I found out later that shortly after I fired him, he found out he had a brain tumor which ultimately took his life. Apparently before this, he was really sharp and really good at what he did. I can't imagine how devastating it must be to just totally lose abilities like that, knowing you're smart and capable but just being utterly unable to utilize it. Story 22. I worked at a bowling alley as a teenager. One girl was immediately fired for dropping a ball on the foot of a complaining patron. Oops. Story 23. Urinating in the Caesar salad bucket. The salad that was about to be plated and served to a 125-person wedding reception. In the employee's defense, he asked to go to the bathroom and the head chef would not let him leave the salad station. Story 24. This was at the current company I work at, about 6 years ago. Dude starts on a Monday, and on Tuesday, we have our department holiday party and the dude gets pretty lit up. During a group photo, for whatever reason, this guy gets the brilliant idea to reach his arm around the woman standing next to him and grab and honk her boob. She loudly protested. He claimed he was just joking and that she was not who he thought she was. Well, who she was the CMO of the company, and despite his repeated protestations that it was all a joke, he was promptly informed that he would have to leave the party immediately and not to bother coming back to work the next day. I will never forget that example of sheer drunken dumb until the last day of my life. Story 25. Worked at Staples. The ex-employee was putting a Galaxy S3 tablet into his pocket in the back room. I was around the corner and the manager was very quick to tell him he's fired and he will be calling the cops. The ex-employee said he was just going to leave before they showed up. The manager reminded him he has his address and information from the hiring process. He proceeded to cry. Story 26. A food runner at a bar I used to frequent was fired from his job for stealing a giant bottle of Grey Goose. The best part is that it was a display-only bottle that was filled with water. Story 27. A friend of mine got fired on the spot for posting a minor plot point on Facebook about a movie we were working on. He made a comment about how dumb some of the plots was under the trailer posted for the movie. Sadly, his friend had a friend who worked at the studio we were working for. Just like that, blacklisted from the company. Story 28. The employee stole money out of a customer's bag. Well, the customer was watching. Well, on like 3 different cameras. She was removed by the police, and our senior-most manager on duty went to the police station to fire her directly from there. Story 29. Yelled out, "Screw you! What are you gonna do? Fire me?" Ding, ding, ding. Let's see what he's won. Story 30. Worked at Waffle House. A cook came in for the first time in weeks, clearly on something, not wearing shoes. The manager goes to tell him that he can't cook without shoes because it's a health code violation. The cook gets angry, takes a pork chop off the grill with a spatula, shouts, "Screw you!" and flings it at the manager's face. I don't know why, but this one really got me. Picturing the whole situation is so funny. Story 31. Having dinner in a diner one night, as a woman was leaving the restaurant, the server called her a cheapskate for leaving a small tip. He then proceeded to follow her out the door, talking smack about how he hates people that don't tip well. He didn't realize her husband was outside. Husband tells him to bug her off. The waiter throws a punch and the husband roughs him up. The manager saw what was going on and called the cops while screaming at the waiter that he was fired. I was looking for a job at the time. When everything calmed down, I asked the manager if he was hiring. He laughed his ass off and hired me on the spot. Story 32. I fired a guy on day 1. We hired him, and as a part of our practice, we require a clean criminal record check. Told us that wouldn't be an issue. He got started. I went through his papers after the fact, like I got all this information on day 1. I go to his criminal record check. The guy had several infractions on his record, including theft, auto theft, petty crimes, etc., etc. He had to go, and so he did. Story 33. Pulled down a male coworker's pants in the office during business hours. While said coworker was talking to 2 female peers. The poor guy wasn't wearing underwear. The pants puller was escorted out of the office within that hour. We were all in our 30s, and this was at a publicly traded multinational. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out this next video. The YouTube algorithm really thinks you like it.